What up, Wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy. We're both in the place, and we both like it a magic. Ain't that right, bud? Now, today we are entering the final lap of Aetherdrift Standard, everyone. The arena is empty, except for one man, still driving and striving as fast as he can. Me? No, I've been playing Balatro for the last couple of days. Don't do it to yourself. It's more addictive than cocaine Cheetos. I'm talking about Mimi over here. Mimeoplasm has been trying to make it in Standard, but no word from the Standard speed stars on this guy's place within the team. No, instead, the Commander Car Club has been calling this guy's name, right? You can do cool stuff like put it up under a giggling skitter spike or whatever it's called. Giggling skitter spike? I think I got that right. That seems like a load of fun, but this dude's getting lapped in Standard so far this season. Which is sad, really, because big reveal here, it was good in Standard the entire time. And I should know, I've spent every non-Balatro hour of the last 3 weeks trying to make this deck something, and that's like 3.5 hours, right? Spent a lot more time than that on this deck, don't worry. A lot of that time has been spent banging my bald head against the nearest wall trying to figure out how to make this deck a magic deck. You know, for the longest time it felt like a bag of Himalayan salt lamps, just good for nothing, as useless as a Wendy's french fry, but I think we finally were able to whip it into good enough shape to show you today. Yes, as usual, there are secrets and gimmicks to making bad cards good in Standard, but if I could put one skill on a resume, it would probably be that, along with perfect ankles. You never get to see those, but I can show you today's deck.
And I'm your favorite magic channel's favorite magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Hey, real quick, make sure you like the thing, sub to the sandwich, no pressure, but if you want, you can check out the Patreon. I left a link down there for you because I'm a nice guy. Just $1 a month is all it takes to vote on content around here. That's why we're doing this video today. But I gotta say, this is one of those times where me and the Patreon people were 100% simpatico. Like this, son, I and them both wanted to see the Mimi over here. Where'd he go? Where's the green guy? There he is. There's our boy. Now, Mimi sounds like a pretty innocent name, right? But I got to point out that if a guy's name is Jimmy, his real name is James. So if this guy's name is Mimi, its real name is Mames, and that's exactly what it does. Fitting name. Now, the first thing I need to tell you about old buddy over here is how many copies we're actually playing, because he's just been sitting over here on screen like a grapefruit the entire time with no text overlaying him whatsoever. No information for you, so I might as well come off of some of it. But there's a reason I haven't been telling you. You see, we started on 4 copies of this card because I'm a big stupid, basically. Sentence there, you know, like I knew that 4 copies was not going to be ideal, but I guess I'll use the excuse that it was for science. End of the day, we ended up on 2 copies of this card because very often a deck really doesn't need a playset of a card that won't come down until the very late game anyway. Plus, we got lots of ways of drawing into this, so the fact that it's just a 2 of isn't that big of a deal. That's because, like, turboplasm, I guess, isn't necessarily where you want to be when you're building this deck strategically. You know, you could go out of your way to play a bunch of creatures that mill other creatures into your yard, and I'm playing a total of 32 creatures, and some of them ramp and some of them mill, and Molt Tender's really good. I'm playing 16 Molt Tender, and this is going to be a 15-15 when it comes down to whatever like pipe dream you're having. You come back down a little bit, Space Cadet, because again, sometimes you got to be slightly more methodical with your game plan. Because it turns out that at the end of the day, creatures just die as a natural course of playing a game of Magic. Or sometimes you dump them in your graveyard because of a discard effect. You don't have to go out of your way and build your entire deck to make sure that a turn 4 Mimeoplasm gets one decent creature. No, just like play Magic, man, and then later on in the game, you can turn Mimeoplasm into copies of the best creatures you've lost throughout the game. And it's also a 9/9, so that tends to be very good. But ultimately, no matter how you decide to build a deck, you always end up with the same question around the beginning of the deck building process, and that is, what are the best creatures for Mimeoplasm to eat? It turns out one of the best answers to that question across a lot of formats is the moldy oldie herself, Muldrotha over here, recently reprinted in Foundations, which I was really happy about. We get this card in Standard for 5 years again. That's awesome. But there's a reason they knew it'd be safe to do that, right? It's a 6-drop in Standard that doesn't do much the turn it comes into play unless you have a couple extra mana or a land drop left, right? So they're daring us to try to make this card work. That's why I'm really comfortable with the silver bullet here. I could sit here and explain it all day, but I think one of the best explanations for it is that cards like Mimeoplasm actually allow us to play fewer copies of cards like this, which is good. It's a 6-drop. You play more than 1 or 2 6-drops in your Standard deck, especially without a whole lot of ramp, and see how you feel about it. It's not going to go super well. So we can't play like 3 copies of Muldrotha. That would be madness. But again, Mimeoplasm like helps us get away with playing just a couple of copies of certain cards. But believe it or not, there are cards in the deck we're playing more than 2 copies of. And Sultai's not used to that, but sometimes you got to do it. So let's take a look at our Overlords real quick. Yeah, we're playing a whole suite of these. I got my reasons. So let's take a look first at Overlord of the Balemurk, but I guess we might as well look at Overlord of the Hauntwoods and Overlord of the Flood Pits along with it, man. Just the gang's all here, man. Let's get them all in the car at the same time. Now, Overlord of the Balemurk fills our graveyard, which is pretty good for our Mimeoplasm Muldrotha-esque deck. We want a bunch of stuff in our yard. We'll take that. But Overlord of the Hauntwoods ramps us into our bigger plays like Mimeoplasm and Muldrotha and all these other, giant overlords. They seem to be like pretty expensive for the most part. So if we play like an Overlord of the Hauntwoods on turn 3, we can play any Overlord on the next turn, and that's a pretty good sequence. And finally, Flood Pits is actually like a pretty big chunky flyer, at least in terms of power, so this can get through for big damage, but it also allows us to put cards into our yard for the Mimeoplasm to eat, for the Muldrotha to play later or whatever. So even though you're discarding cards to it, hey, you got a Muldrotha out, you're basically just putting those cards right back in your hand when you discard them. So this is nice to not only have a card draw piece, but also something that fuels these graveyard strategies. And just to kind of state the obvious here, these are creatures in your graveyard, so Mimi can eat them and then turn into them to get those sick attacks triggers too. Now we're not quite done with the creatures, and I'm also not quite done with the fun ofs. I am playing one copy of Koma World Eater in here, which is also really popular in commander builds for Mimeoplasm, but you want to do it in standard too, right? I mean, this does a whole bunch for the deck. Not only, again, if you're hard pressed, can you do like a turbo Mimeoplasm thing where you drop this in your yard early, turn Mimeoplasm into it on turn 4, and then on turn 5, or even turn 4 if you had a little bit of ramp, you can attack him with Mimi and get a bunch of 3/3s. Like, that's cool, but again, you don't have to be pressed to do that. We have Overlord of the Hauntwoods in this deck. We have a bunch of removal in this deck, so you should just naturally get to the point where you can play Koma if you end up with it in your hand. But again, just like Muldrotha, we don't want to draw this very early. We want to draw it at the right time. So let's actually make it to where it's kind of tough to draw the card. We won't want it to be too easy to get our Koma. And honestly, if we never see a Koma in a game, that's okay a lot of the time too. But when we do see it, it's got some great lines. It's a good creature in and of itself. It can't be countered, which is awesome. And even better, once Mimeoplasm eats it and becomes it, it gets Ward 4. And remember, Mimeoplasm can eat creatures at instant speed, so if your opponent targets Mimeoplasm like a go for the throat or something, just turn it into this guy, give it Ward 4, and maybe negate that entire play. So there's some really cool things that this lends to the deck, but we really cannot play too many copies. I'm going to take a break from these creatures for a second, because I've just showed you like 14 5-mana cards in a row, right? So I should probably at least point out that this is in fact a Beans deck. We are playing up the Beanstalk in here. Should it be banned? That's apparently the conversation this week. And this is the first time that people have been calling for bans on a card in Standard in like the whole time I've had the YouTube channel, that I would say no. Usually I'm totally fine with bans. I'm chill on them. I don't care. I like when Standard gets shaken up and all that. But please don't take my amazing like card advantage engine from me that goes in like 80% of the decks that I build. 100% of the decks that have forests in them. You know what I mean? Like, Up the Beanstalk really is that good, and that might mean it should probably eat a ban, but just not yet, baby. Not yet. One more Beanstalk deck, and I guess it's this one. But when they're talking about banning a card, it's pretty good, right? And it's especially good in this deck. This is our numero uno card draw engine, and we need it to play Magic. There's other ways to draw cards in this deck. I've already shown you Flood Pits. We'll get to another creature that draws cards in a second, but as far as turn over turn value, it really does not get better than Beans. But that's not news to nobody, so let's move on to 2 copies of Kiora the Rising Tide over here. Boy, we sure are putting a bunch of stuff in our yard. We're putting so many things in our yard, dude. So let's play a couple copies of this, man. Not only will this draw us into better cards in the mid-game, but we can also fill our graveyard with stuff we intend to eat with Mimeoplasm later. All that's sick. And once we do have a bunch of cards in our yard, obviously Mimeoplasm can copy the Kiora from our yard, swing in and make that 8/8. But I can't play a whole bunch of copies of this because I want more legends in my 3-drop slot. Let's play 2 copies of Glissa Sunslayer over here. Again, these last couple of things are both legends, so we don't really need to play a whole bunch of copies of them. I think 2 and 2 is enough for both of them. And Glissa, not only an amazing creature to resolve on turn 3 in her own right. That's one of the strengths of this deck, is it just plays good Magic cards. Kiora is pretty good, and Glissa's amazing. Maybe one of the best 3-drops in Standard, bar none, right? So obviously you're gonna play Glissa in your deck that got Golgari colors anyway, but when you do eat this out of your yard with a Mimeoplasm, suddenly you have potential at like a 9/9 first strike or death touch, and that can get out of hand. But into the 4-drop slot to check out the last creature in the deck. It is the one of, and I guess you'll thank me for that, Sheldred the Apocalypse. I don't want you to go shelling out like, oh gosh, can I do math? $225 on a 3 of Shelly or anything. I think you just need the one. And honestly, do you need the one? No, probably not. I'm not sure that you do. There's all kinds of other stuff you can do with this slot if you wanted to. But hey, I guess good news. In good news, Shelly's down like $7 from the last time I saw her. So hey, if you want copy, you want to go ahead and snatch one up now. But either way, I felt like Shelly was a good call in this deck. Again, just like Glissa, just like Kiora, just like some of the other cards we've looked at, just good cards. Overlord of the Haunt, which is a good card. Like this has the same thing going for it. If you get it on turn 4, you get it on turn 4. You get it on turn 7, you'll still be happy with that. But later on in the game, Mimeoplasm can eat it, become a copy of it, and they still have to deal with that ridiculous ability. So always good to pack one copy. Now we're almost done with the main deck here, it turns out. We just got to look at some of our removal here because that's basically what the entire rest of the main deck is. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some slides, baby. Everybody likes slides. We just got back from Hawaii. Let's check out some slides. We have 2 copies of Grim Bauble in the deck, along with 2 Momentum Breaker and a Nowhere to Run. You'll note that these are all permanents. They're all enchantment or whatever off artifacts. I should have just stuck with permanents. They sit on the table for Muldrotha, right? Like basically if these end up in your yard, and with things like Grim Bauble, you can force them to end up in your yard. You just play them again with Muldrotha, and I want to prioritize permanent base removal in a deck like this for that reason. But that's not to say that we don't have regular removal. I'm also playing 3 Go for the Throat, but I'm also playing 1 Virtue of Persistence. And I should probably show you the Tranquil Throwback that we're on a 2 of here. You know, this is the last creature in the deck, so Mimeoplasm can eat it. It's not like it's going to do much, but it will contribute to its power toughness. So delicious. It likes it. But one way or the other, this is also a way to blow up artifacts and enchantments or whatever. Well, enchantments, I shouldn't have said artifacts. Either way, it blows up a thing, you know, it gains us some life against aggro, and it messes around in graveyards, which can be really, really important too. So does a little bit of everything. Amazing utility, dude, and also is good in the Mimeoplasm deck because it's extra food. But apart from that, Virtue of Persistence is another kind of permanent base removal spell, right? But if this ends up in our yard for whatever reason, Muldrotha can play it later in the game, and I like that. But early on, it's just a decent removal spell, and we need some 2-drops in the day. It can't just all be 5s, right? So apart from that, in a similar vein, the 3 Go for the Throats just may be the most reliable removal spell in the entire format. Let's play a few copies. Here's the lands. There really ain't too much to it. I'm mostly prioritizing Surveil lands so we can get more cards in our yard, and they're just good anyway. But I've also got 3 creature lands in there, a few different Restless things. The Restless Reef is actually kind of really important because some of the time we almost mill ourselves out with the Overlord of the Balemerc and all the card draw off of Up Beans and stuff. So sometimes it's kind of important to have a big fish land that hits them and actually mills them. That's good. But let's pop in and see what that sideboard do, and you may notice the high number of 1s and 2s. That's what Sultai likes, baby. But let's start with the 1 of Grim Bauble we have in here to add the main deck and respect aggro as much as possible, because you have to do that in this format whether you want to or not. But there's also a couple of Ghost Vacuums, like basically every other deck in the format carries 2 Ghost Vacuums in its board for pretty obvious reasons. But there's also 2 Negates in there, just like every other deck with access to blue mana, right? For, again, pretty obvious reasons. 3rd Tranquil Frillback. Again, am I being like too unsubtle here? You know, utility is what we really want in this board. And again, Sultai does a lot of it very well. So let's just put another one of these Frillbacks in there to blow up important stuff. But we've also got 2 Malicious Eclipse. Again, we're respecting aggro here, but very often respecting a deck means putting its face in the dirt in games 2 and 3. And that's what things like Malicious Eclipse can do to aggro, along with Deadly Cover-Up, which will trigger our Beanstalk, blow up all the dudes on the board. These are all things we want. But there's also a Gix's Command that keeps floating in and out of the main deck. I keep swapping stuff in and out, but ultimately I do think this ends up in the sideboard. It's a very good Magic card, though. And then 1 Nissa Ascended Animus. This, too, just like a bunch of cards on the board, will trigger beans, but it's great in them grindy games, and we want to grind anyway. Problem is, sometimes the opponent don't want to grind, right? But if the opponent's going long too, this is great in those games. Apart from that, though, there's also a Tishana's Tidebinder in here. I shouldn't have to explain that one too much. Amazing against them triggered abilities and whatnot. But Sentinel of the Nameless City might require a little bit more explanation. It's a weird-looking card, and if you wanted, you could play like Preacher of the Schism in this slot or something like that for a lot of the same reasons, because it can't be killed by a bunch of the like 3 damage or 3 toughness-based removal removal in the format like Nowhere to Run, Lightning Strike, Virtua Persistence. It can't be killed by a cut down. That's relatively important. And again, leaves a lot of value. It's a good creature to eat with Mimeoplasm. Got a good attacks trigger too. So just a lot of good things about Sentinel, but I didn't feel like it was quite right for the main deck. That said, there are a couple of matchups like Aggro and the Sphere of Isolation / Pixie decks where I think this card shines. Now here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 68.5, which seems like a really, really high score. But I got to tell you right now, it is really hard to win a game 1 with this deck. So don't take this thing into best of 1 and then be like, Dev, I went like 0-6 with this thing. What are you doing? It's a best of 3 deck. This time around is 100% a best of 3 deck, man. And it turns out that for a lot of the time I was building this deck, the question was, would this be a better deck if I just like took out the Mimeoplasm and the Muldrotha and the Koma and added like counter spells and like maybe another big threat or a horned lock whale or something? Would this be better if it were just kind of a Sultai mid-range control hybrid instead of trying to force, you know, these weird like Mimeoplasm plays? But I gotta say that any fears that I have about the deck, and hopefully that you too have about the deck, are assuaged when I think about games like the example game I'm about to show you here. Because A, when we get rocking and rolling, we get to do all of our fun, funky late game Mimeoplasm Muldrotha stuff. We do very well, and that should be obvious. When we get to do the thing, we're a good deck. But there's a lot of times where we can actually cook, even if our opponent has kicked a hot plate across the room. In this game, basically one of the worst possible things that could happen happened twice in the same game, very early in the game, and the deck was still able to recover from it. So I could show you things like Mimeoplasm copy and Muldrotha. Here's a clip of it right here. That happens. Ooh, but I'd rather show you a game where the deck actually faced a good deal of diversity and came up against the deck that basically countered its plan entirely, and we still came up with the win through grinding, baby. So let me get to it now. Now, there ain't nothing wrong with a little bump and grind, and that's exactly what this deck does, even when it runs up against a card that hard counters 40% of what it's trying to do. Matter of fact, it runs up against 2 copies of the same card that hard counters what it's trying to do. So let's join this game in progress against a sort of Golgari graveyard variant. Opponent casts Blanchwood Prowler, which promptly puts 2 of their Up the Beanstalks into their graveyard. We play 1 to the battlefield. I think that's the more appropriate way to use that card. Second turn, they're going to play Insidious Fungus and go ahead and take out our Beanstalk. They're jealous and upset, but that's cool. We got a couple more in our hand and a couple of turns to waste, so we'll just put an Up the Beanstalk into play. But that's when they play a Ghost Vacuum, which is super scary for just about everything we're trying to do. It invalidates like 2 or 3 of the cards currently in our hands. So we'll get a Fabled Passage down, get our island, and then just go Beanstalk number 2. Why not? We can hold up this Nowhere to Run and see if the opponent gives us something to use it on. They get in with their Blanchwood Prowler. We'll just go ahead and use that Nowhere to Run, put it in their yard, and they get a second Ghost Vacuum, which is disastrous. So we'll just play a 5-mana Overlord of the Flood Pits, which will draw us a total of 4 cards. We have to get rid of one of them, but that's a ton of cards, man. We are going to pitch a land, and we do a lot of that in this game. Opponent plays Nowhere to Run on our Overlord and then hits it with the Ghost Vacuum. So they've already got a couple of decent creatures under Vacuum number 1 over there. We pitch a land at end of turn. They just say go for their turn, and we can cast an Overlord of the Hauntwoods. That's going to draw us a couple more off of our beans and get us a fresh land. Now, we've got a whole bunch of cards in our hand. We search for the creature land, Restless Cottage, and then we play it. Opponent Overwhelming Remorses, our Hauntwoods. So even though they're a little bit stuck on lands and they didn't get their beans, they're still fighting back really well here, and those Ghost Vacuums are looking pretty good, especially considering we can't really drop Koma in the yard. We can't do anything with Mimeoplasm this game, right? So we definitely have to play around it. Instead, we'll just play Koma to the table. Why not? We're going to get a couple of draws off of beans there, and we're going to have to discard at end of turn, but not before opponent hits a couple of creatures with different Ghost Vacuums. We're going to pitch another land, which is again going to become a theme throughout this game. Opponent plays Coddle Scavenger and gets a card back, which I just didn't even know what this card did when they first played it, but it actually seems pretty decent for the matchup. We'll put a beans in our yard off of a Surveil land, and then we'll just get in with Restless Cottage and a Koma. That's going to make a whole bunch of dudes. We also get to mess around in graveyards with the cottage, but there's no creatures to take out for the Ghost Vacuum. That said, we'll target a Fabled Passage and they'll just Ghost Vacuum it away instead of us getting it, so we don't get a food token. That's fun tech. We get in with our guys and get our 4 3/3s, and we play a Glissa Sunslayer, more or less forcing the sweeper here. Opponent Ghost Vacuums a second time and then plays their Deadly Cover-Up. At this point, things go back to neutral, and it's looking like we're not in the best place, especially considering they have Ghost Vacuums and they just put a bunch of really good stuff into our graveyard. But if you'll note our hand, it stayed stocked the entire game, and we still have a bunch of really good cards. So we're just going to resolve a Harvester of Misery to the table because it's really big, draw a couple of cards, and then we'll just go ahead and get a 5-mana Overlord of the Flood Pit. So what do we draw? 6 cards if you count our draw step this turn. We have to pitch a card, but we've always got lands to throw into the bin, so we don't really care too much. We just have 10 power on the table. Do something about that with your 1 card over there. They're going to waste well, I say waste. They're going to use at the end of their turn wisely, activating Ghost Vacuum here. And then finally, they start to flood out. But that's fine. That means I can activate Ghost Vacuum 1 here and get 5 different creatures and a bunch of good enter the battlefield triggers. They also get an Insidious Fungus. They can take out one of our artifacts or enchantments, most likely a Beanstalk when they get the chance, but that's totally fine. We can just play a land and then Harvester of Misery number 2, draw a couple of cards, and take out all the creatures they just got from their Ghost Vacuums. That seems like a pretty good deal to me. We're going to get in for a few damage here with our Harvester and actually put them all the way down to 9, more than half their life total here. We'll resolve Glissa Sunslayer and still have 3 mana up, but they're going to go ahead and use their Ghost Vacuum while Glissa's on the stack to take our Tranquil Frill back, and that'll give them a couple creatures under that one. We use our last 3 mana to Kiora here, draw a couple lands, pitch a couple lands, that's how that works some of the time, and then on our opponent's turn, they're going to take some time tapping their mana down and all that, and eventually they're going to end up activating this Ghost Vacuum number 2 right here, and they're only going to get a couple of creatures off of it, and those creatures aren't actually very good. Sure, Glissa's in there, but they begin to see the writing on the wall. They know that our hand is stacked. We have way too many creatures out, and they're at too low of a life total, so they're donezo. Good game, opponent, but that's Allski Kowalski for this one, although I do feel a moral obligation to let you know this deck's like $600 in paper for some reason. Sheldred's expensive, Overlords are expensive, the lands are expensive. It all adds up to a price that makes sense only technically, right? It's $600 for a stack of cardboard. Would you pirate a car? Yes, I guess I would in this case, but one way or the other, that's Itsky Lewitsky. Just let me know how you felt about the whole kit and caboodle, right? Just how would you build this deck yourself? Would you do the Turboplasm thing, or are you getting a little bit slower with your night? Do you like to take your time when you're with your lady? You know what I'm saying? That's all I want to do. But one way or the other, let me know how you do it and what creatures you want a Mimeoplasm to eat in Standard. Anything I didn't put in here that's just the absolute best thing, and Dev, you're a big stupid dumb, let me know down there in the comments. I'm sure you're super ready to do so. But apart from that, do all the YouTube stuff. On the way out, before you hit the lights, hit the likes. You see, I'm trying to make that work, and I'm still not quite sure it flows, but it's the button shaped like a thumb. You can't miss it. It's the one, it looks like this. You can also sub to the sandwich, by which I mean channel. Don't try and sub to a sandwich. People will look at you funny. Apart from that, you can check out the Patreon. Just one more soft pitch. Look, you don't got to do it. It's no pressure. It's up to you. I feel like I'm worth $1 a month, but if you just really don't, you're strapped right now, or you just don't feel like you're obligated to do it, that's all fine. I'm just glad that you're still here watching the video. We're a big family. We love each other. But anyway, I guess that I'm donezo for this one, though. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.